So we're taking a look at Wolfenstein: The New Order running on the i5-1135G7. Now this is currently running at 1080p at the lowest possible settings, and the performance is decent. It was actually pretty enjoyable. You know, it is a single player game, so it can be a lot more forgiving in terms of performance. Because like when you're playing a competitive shooter game against other players, when you're getting half to like a third or fourth of their FPS, that can make a very noticeable difference in like how the game is played for you. But a single player game, it's just a lot more forgiving. The AI is kind of just tailored for this kind of stuff, so you're gonna have a better experience like this. Now I could not get the FPS to go above 60. It was just completely locked. I don't know why. I messed around with like all kinds of settings and I just could not get it to go above 60. Now that's perfectly fine because the display on this on this laptop rather is only 1080p 60 FPS anyway, so we don't need the extra frame rate, honestly. And one thing to note is if you actually lock your frame rate to a specific like setting to like 30 or 60, it can actually lead to the laptop running cooler because it doesn't have to work as hard to render frames that it can't even display anyway. So instead of, just boosting the GPU and the CPU to try to hit like 70 FPS and then having to downclock because it overheated, it will just stay at a consistent 60 because it doesn't need to do any more work than that. There's no more heat being generated. So it can be a nice way to save yourself from the occasional stutter here and there that could be caused from, boosting and then suddenly downclocking to like maintain a certain temperature. But overall, the performance at 1080p is just very passable. I enjoyed it like this, but I did decide to give 720p a go just to see what it would be like. And the performance is actually noticeably better. Obviously, the average isn't going to really exceed anything past 60. So what we're really comparing here is those 1% lows. And there is a noticeable jump in 1% low performance. Before we were getting into the 30s, while here we're in the 40s. And that 10 FPS difference is very noticeable because the lower your frame rate is, the more noticeable drops like that will be. Like 5 FPS drop when you're at 45 FPS is going to be way more noticeable than a 5 FPS drop when you're at 250 frames per second. So in these kinds of situations, getting a 10 FPS uplift in the 1% lows does make a noticeable improvement in the gameplay on how it feels. Now, whether or not the resolution drop is worth it for you is up to you to decide.